Hello and welcome to Lesson 3. In this lesson, we're going to give an overview of the writing process. We'll talk about pre-writing, we'll talk about what happens when you submit your manuscript, and we will talk about some tips on how to write your first draft. To begin, let's take a look at where we're at with the overall project management approach and look at the graphic. So for this lesson, we are here in the planning stage. In a previous lesson, we talked about scientific paper structure. That was lesson 1. In lesson 2, we talked about finding your references and building up your reference library in the planning stage. And now we're talking about pre-writing here in the planning stage. The learning outcomes for this lesson are as follows. When you conclude this lesson, you should be able to explain the submission and review process. You should be able to identify a single target journal. I want you to be able to determine who should be authors on your paper, and as part of that process, who should not be authors on your paper but should be in the acknowledgments section. And fourthly, at the end of this lesson, you will plan your first draft. You'll make a writing plan, and you'll have a rough outline of your article. So let's just take a step back and think about the entire process of writing a scientific paper. We can look at it as a project management task, and we can also think about the writing process all the way up to submission as occurring in a few different stages. And I've listed 6 stages here. What we're talking about here is breaking down the writing process into planning, pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and submitting. So today we are talking about planning and pre-writing. So in the planning part of writing a paper, which is also in the planning part of the project management approach, first think about our intended audience. That is, who do you want to read your paper? So think very carefully about the characteristics of that audience. Which journals do they read? What types of techniques are they interested in? What types of questions are they asking in their research? What kind of results do they need from you to advance their research? So think very carefully about exactly who you want to read your paper. And that's going to help you narrow down your list of target journals. And then you're also going to make a writing plan. What you're going to do is collect and review literature, annotate that literature, and organize it. Now, you should be able to do that with what we talked about in our first 2 lessons. So we talked about how to read scientific papers, how they're structured, what to look for in terms of key elements. And in lesson 2, we talked about finding literature and collecting it, building up your database of references. So this is going to match well with what we talked about before. In the drafting stage of writing your paper, what you'll do is write all the sections of the paper. And then after you have this complete first draft, what you'll do is start with revising and editing. Now you are ready to submit your paper to your target journal, where it will go through the peer review process. Let's talk about what happens when you submit your paper to a journal for review. Now this is something that I didn't understand for a long time. I'd actually published quite a few papers, and I was a corresponding author before I got a good handle on this scientific review process. So the first step is that the corresponding author will submit the manuscript and all the figures and supplementary files through the journal's website. And once it's submitted, it will go to an associate editor. Now, different journals may have different names for this position, but a lot of journals call it associate editor, so we'll just go with that. Now, the associate editor will look over your paper. He or she will read your cover letter, and he or she will read your abstract and glance through the figures and tables and think about whether it's a good fit for this particular journal. Does it meet the needs of the audience? Does it match the scope and the aims of the journal? Is it a complete paper? Does it look like it was done in a scientifically sound manner? And at this point, they may decide to reject the paper. This is called a desk reject. And the desk reject usually happens in between one day and 1 week. It's usually pretty quick. And so reasons you might get a desk reject are because the subject matter of your article doesn't match well with the journal. If you're trying for a high impact journal, the associate editor may feel like the work is not novel enough or will not have enough of an impact, and they might tell you to submit it somewhere else. Other reasons for a desk reject are technical reasons. You didn't follow some of the instructions, in which case you might be able to correct those mistakes and then resubmit. If the associate editor decides to send your paper into the review process, then they're going to send it to a handling editor. And that handling editor is then going to recruit peer reviewers, and they'll recruit 2, sometimes more peer reviewers who will carefully read your paper. They'll evaluate its strengths, its weaknesses, the scientific rigor of the methods and of the results and the interpretation, and they'll make a recommendation, and that recommendation will go back to the handling editor. So once the recommendation goes back to the handling editor, that editor will make a decision. And at the same time they make the decision, they will send the peer reviewers' reports back to the corresponding author. Let's look at the decisions that could be made. So the decision could be a hard reject. In other words, the journal is not going to publish your work, even if you revise it and resubmit it. They just don't want to publish it, and they'll tell you that you should try to publish it somewhere else. The next decision that could be made is a reject and resubmit decision. So the paper is not going to be accepted in its current form, but if you make major revisions, they would be willing to take another look at your paper. You could resubmit it and potentially get a better decision next time. That's a very common outcome. It's probably the most common outcome, is either an outright rejection or reject and resubmit. When one of your papers gets rejected, it's going to hurt, but don't feel too bad because that is the most common situation. Now, a third decision that could happen is you might get what's called a minor revisions, or some journals say could be accepted with revisions. That is really the best decision that you can hope for. That's the best decision you will get. The fourth option is accept. And that's not going to happen the first time. Now, if you get one of these decisions that allows you to resubmit, so a reject and resubmit, or it could be accepted with revisions, now's your chance to address the peer reviewers' reports. So those reports came back to the corresponding author. That author will share it with the rest of the co-authors. And what you will do is when you resubmit the paper, you will go through all of the reviewer comments and address them point by point, while at the same time revising your manuscript to take those reviewer comments into account. Now, there may be times when you think the reviewer comments are incorrect or not applicable, and you don't want to do what they're telling you you should do. In that case, you need to make a strong scientific justification for not following the recommended changes. Otherwise, if you agree with what the reviewer is saying, then go ahead and make those changes and indicate what you did in your response. And usually the reviewers pick up on some things that you missed, and they do a good job at helping you make your paper better. Now, after you resubmit, it will go back through this process. It'll go back to the handling editor. If it was a reject and resubmit, it will definitely go back to the reviewers. If it's a minor revisions decision, it may or may not go back to the reviewers. And then at that point, you could get an accept decision, or you might get another minor revisions decision. So you might have to go through revisions 2 times or 3 times, maybe even more, before you get to that accept decision. But once you get to accept, it's going to be worth it, because that's just such a great feeling when your paper is accepted for publication. Now, why did I tell you that you're not going to get an accept decision on the first submission? Let me show you this quote from Joshua Schimmel. He's the author of a book called Writing Science. He says, "I've authored 175 papers, written hundreds of reviews, and handled about 2,000 manuscripts as an editor. Across all those, not a single paper has ever been accepted outright. Not one. Some only needed a light bandage, others required major surgery, but they all needed some editorial care." And so I think those numbers will tell you that the chances of your paper being accepted on the first try are very close to zero. And I'm not telling you that to make you feel, anxious or apprehensive. I'm just telling you that so you'll know what to expect.